Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. Another night, another deadly barrage. Russia has intensified its aerial assault on Ukraine, launching the largest drone strike yet on Kiev, with further damage reported in Kharkiv as well. As Ukraine braces for more pressure is mounting on its allies to boost military aid, especially Patriot air defense systems. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, diplomatic tensions are simmering, with curious phone calls between Donald Trump and both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy making headlines. Now, to unpack this all, I'm joined by Brent Sadler, Senior Fellow Center for National Defense at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for being with us here on World Talks this evening.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, Brent, so Russia has just launched its largest drone attack on Kiev, another on Kharkiv. And I mean, what's interesting here is that almost all the time we always keep saying Russia has launched the largest attack, the largest attacks, and it's as if it almost always keeps intensifying here. Now, what are the implications of these intensified assaults for Ukraine's defensive strategy and international military support?
No, outstanding question. I think it's important to put this spring and now summer offensives in proper context. Clearly, when Trump was coming into office, he made clear that he wanted to resolve the war in Ukraine as quick as possible. That certainly is in America's best interest at the same time. However, we've seen that this has just continued on, and clearly there is still a lot of fight both in Kyiv and Moscow. On the Russian part, I would place these very large-scale attacks. Timing is also significant. Before President Trump meets with Netanyahu, again, the issues of regional peace treaties and ceasefires is coming up. It is important to understand that the summer fighting season comes to a close in a couple months. So Putin wants to signal strength and to try to encourage Trump to accept his positions on these negotiations. And I think that's the political context of these most recent, very large drone and missile attacks. Again, there is an end to this that's going to eventually come. Hopefully it comes before the end of the summer fighting season. But if not, when things settle down in the early fall with the rains and the very historic muds, there'll be another time when operations slow down and another window for a ceasefire and perhaps a treaty.
Brent, I mean, you are saying here that time is definitely of essence, but let me ask you this now. Would you say that this latest wave of Russian attacks are indeed, how you mentioned, part of a broader summer offensive, or is it more of a psychological pressure campaign?
Well, I think the psychological part of this is on D.C. as much as it's on Kyiv, to signal that Putin still has a lot of military might and capacity, while there are indications that's not the case. So he's trying to present a very strong facade or position so that it can strengthen his negotiating position, so that there other parties, the United States or even other European countries, might be more inclined to accept a negotiated settlement that's favorable to Putin, but certainly not one that's suitable to Kyiv. And this is where the rub comes in. It has to also be suitable to the United States, which is an enduring peace, which then brings to a point it has to also be workable from the Ukrainian perspective. It has to be a defensible border. It has to be a meaningful economic future for Ukraine. And certainly, I think questions about its future security alliances should not be part and parcel to this negotiation. Of course, talking about NATO.
All right, Brent, so you're mentioning here, of course, a very important word here, negotiations. Now, let me shift gears here, and I want you to tell me what you think of that phone conversations that Trump had with both Putin and then with Zelenskyy. I mean, Trump said he was very disappointed with Putin after their call. I mean, would you say this could suggest rising tensions between America's relationship with Russia? Is there a possibility that the U.S. is going to finally impose serious sanctions on Moscow? I mean, to pressure them into peace negotiations, how you said earlier.
Well, it's clear coming in January with the inauguration of President Trump that more pressure would be necessary to compel Putin to enter into negotiations. Honestly, pressure was also needed to be brought to bear on Zelenskyy to come to an accommodation that was achievable in that peace treaty too. This is the famous blowout or blow up in the meeting in the summit in the White House between Zelenskyy and Trump. That thankfully is behind us. But clearly President Trump is getting frustrated with Putin. But I think it's a function of not applying enough pressure on Moscow before trying to expect a honest entering into negotiations from the Russians' perspective. And that pressure, I think you're starting to see bear fruit in the recent few weeks. And that is, one, applying more pressure on the dark fleet and its oil income. This is also the markets are turning against Moscow as the oil prices drop significantly. The other is closing off loopholes to allow European nations to continue to buy the oil at a rate higher than the military assistance they've given to Ukraine. This also means providing more American petroleum to the European market, something the Biden administration just could not get itself to do. And then finally, and most significantly, in the last month, you've heard what's called secondary sanctions. These are sanctions applied to countries that skirt the sanctions on Russia directly. Think China, top of the list. Also countries like Iran as well. Of course, Iran has the additional focus of its nuclear program. But China and the ongoing tariff dispute and economic negotiations should be looked at as part and parcel to applying pressure also on their ally in Moscow.
What about Zelensky's phone conversation with Trump? I mean, although it did seem positive, that's how we can assumably call it. I mean, they did discuss the possible delivery of Patriot missiles, more cooperation. But I mean, despite discussing Patriot missiles, Trump has still paused certain weapon shipments. How should we interpret this these mixed signals coming out of Washington?
Yes, kind of looking beyond the headlines and some of the public statements. The timing is important. Trump first called Putin. That phone call was a failure and agitated President Trump further that Moscow wasn't ready to enter in seriously into negotiations. And then the follow-up call with Zelenskyy to assure and to probably also allow the president there in Kiev to understand the United States is probably going to release these weapon holds. Those weapon holds, however, predate these phone calls by some days and was intended to do a review of making sure U.S. security needs were being met at a minimum. But those weapons, the Patriots in particular, are apparently already in Europe and near to being delivered. So perhaps if that is true, in the next few days, we'll see a release. We'll see those weapon systems move into Ukraine to bolster up their defenses. But behind all this, and again, Ukraine needs to be sensitive to this, the United States does not have an endless supply of these high-end weapons. And there is a very severe danger that deterrence is fading in Asia in a potential war with China, which would dwarf what we've seen in Ukraine the last few years.
So, with what you just said, what do you think is the possible solution for Ukraine? What can Ukraine do?
I think it all boils down to success on the battlefield. I think unlike the Biden administration, President Trump team, and again, it's not by public announcements, it's by watching the reality on the ground, Ukraine has been given the green light, it appears, to use their weapon systems and those that have provided them as they see fit in the execution of their war. This is the deep strikes well into Russia by drones, but also the use of long-range artillery and rocket systems to attack deep inside Russia as well. I think this is a way to apply more pressure. And again, it comes down to, can Ukraine turn a battlefield victory in time to signal that Russia's war effort is faltering?
Brent, do you think that Ukraine is preparing for a long war scenario, both militarily and economically? How much could it actually handle?
I think very clearly within the first few months of the war, all the way back in the summer of 2022, Ukraine was already committed to a long fight, understanding the Russians better than anyone else, that their way of fighting was one of attrition. In other words, it was going to be a long war. And Ukraine, having not as many weapons, not having as many people, had to play a very defensive and a very smart long game. In other words, try to apply more cost on the Russians on the battlefield. But it was frustrating on the diplomatic and on the allied front because it was too long and far between that you could see significant changes on the battlefield, successes. The initial first week, the throwing back of the Russian onslaught was significant. The massive advances near Kharkiv was also back in the 2022 timeframe were also significant, and also around Kherson as well. But there hasn't been a significant battlefield victory that would signal that Russia's war effort is flawed and is failing.
What about the EU military assistance to Ukraine, or what is the current state of that? And would you say that it's improved since the early stages of the war?
Well, improved, but it's NATO countries as well as the EU. And the military equipment, it's the hardware that matters on the battlefield, not the dollars or the euros flowing into accounts to balance the budget in Kyiv. What's going to win this war is bullets and missiles and tanks. There's not been enough of that, and that's a symptom of decades of neglect and apathy, and quite frankly, negligence on the part of too many European countries to take care of their own defense. Thankfully, we saw in the last NATO summit that all of these countries, the vast majority, Spain perhaps as an exception, realized that they are well past due the time that they need to spend on their defense. So things have improved, but not nearly fast enough. But there is still some weapons that can be provided from European countries that can fill in the gap, or at least the hold that is currently on those weapon systems going into Ukraine. Their own Patriot batteries, for example.
And Brent, what is your take on Ukraine's NATO accession process? How do you predict that will unfold?
There's no clear picture for the foreseeable future. But what is important is it should not be a condition on a ceasefire or a truce, because it is a sovereign decision of Ukraine and all members of NATO to decide whether or not Ukraine enters, not a deal that is struck between the United States or any other European country and Moscow. So this, I think, needs to be kept off the table. It is something that when the time is right, it should be allowed to be negotiated, decided on the merits of the time. But clearly, NATO has deterred Russia in the past, and I'm sure if NATO countries take their defense seriously and own up to their own responsibilities, it can continue well into the future with, hopefully, Ukraine, but perhaps even without, and a different type of understanding or other security arrangements made with Ukraine into the future.
And meanwhile, Russia still keeps attacking Ukraine on a daily basis. Thank you so much, Brent Sadler, Senior Fellow, Center for National Defense, for being with us here on World Talks this evening.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.